Welcome to From the White Pill Box, the podcast where we stomp on statism and find the white pills along the road to a stateless society. I'm your host, Mark Maresca. I'm the author of the Substack articles of the same name, From the White Pill Box, content specifically for the already red-pilled, libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, people who've overcome the myth of statism or are close to it. It's easy for us to be black-pilled, to believe evil will win. That's where the white pill box comes in. There are real-world reasons to have hope. Let's get going. Greetings all. Thank you so much for listening today. Today's installment is part 5 of our discussion about the myth of authority. I'll link to the previous episodes of this series, parts 1 through 4. Please try to give them a listen because this episode builds on all the previous ones. Here are the bullet points from those episodes as a summary. I identified the root of the state as the myth of authority, the false belief that we need political leaders as moral authorities. This belief directly leads to the state. The myth of authority is the cause. The state is the effect. The myth of authority is indoctrinated into us, creating a false self. The myth has a psychological hold on this part. But we also have what I call our true self, living our private lives with no one ruling us. Pretty much everyone in the world has this true self. Getting red-pilled boils down to our false, indoctrinated self overcoming the myth of authority. The details differ, but it's always a form of clearing the inner fog that makes up that false self. At that point, the state loses its mystical appearance. We realize it's irrelevant. Thus, the root of getting red-pilled is getting past the myth. And I covered lots of examples of how we might turn the tables on the myth in the ways that it affects our speech and thinking to help inoculate us from its influence. Okay, now on to part 5. I'm devoting this entire episode to how the myth of authority has hampered libertarian efforts, our thinking about the state, and our strategies. I'm going to ask you to put your objective critical thinking hats on firmly, because this may challenge some of our current thinking. I will have positive suggestions in a later episode, but for now, please be patient and open-minded. Let me start with an analogy that might help. Suppose people did not yet know how bad smoking is for your health. Then we, the nerds who like understanding things, figured out that smoking causes lots of health problems. I'd say we figured out something really important, wouldn't you? But no sooner had we figured that out, we continued being ourselves and drilled down into the details of the health problems. We dig into the lung cancer issues, throat cancer, skin issues, teeth and gum issues, secondhand smoke, how it gets in your clothes, details. And we don't stop there. We examine how to treat the cancers, how to deal with all those other effects. I stress the word effects here. For decades we do this, talking incessantly about dealing with the effects of smoking. But we're so laser focused on all that, we never spend time on root cause. We never thought to tell people to stop smoking. We took our eye off the ball. So after decades of not connecting the cause with the effect, society in general didn't either. So people still smoke all over the place. And we're always dealing more and more with the effects. Bottom line, the cause, smoking, has incredibly insidious, destructive effects. So bad that our attention is utterly drawn to them, away from the cause itself. That's an analogy for the myth of authority. It's the root cause of the state and all its incredibly insidious, destructive outcomes. So bad that our attention is utterly drawn to them, away from the cause itself. And isn't it true? The state is pretty much all we've talked about, all we think about. The difference from the analogy, of course, smoking was actually never lost as the root cause. Indeed, once we knew it, it was front and center. But the myth of authority? Nope. It never made it to front and center. We've spent all these years and all this effort talking about attacking the state, the cancer, and never mentioning people should stop smoking, meaning getting them over the myth. So, with that as a backdrop, let's look at many of our assumptions as libertarians, how the myth is behind them, how the state manages to keep our eyes off the myth. There's two types of assumptions we've made, about the state itself and about strategy. Let's start with the state. Assumption, a very basic one. Our goal is to see the state go away. Again, the myth of authority makes us laser focus on the state. It makes us talk exclusively about wanting the state to go away. And sure, we do want that. We absolutely want cancer to go away. But now use our substitution technique. You want the state to go away? Then you need the myth to go away. Now, that's a goal that's more direct, striking the root. And you could probably see it would point to different strategies. But this movement started with wanting the state to go away and formed strategies on trying to make it go away. If it had started with wanting the myth to go away, it would have formed strategies on making that go away. Now, true, many of those strategies align and dovetail, but not closely enough. I think 50 years of meager progress proves this. So, with our substitution technique, let's take a crack at this famous question. You've heard it. If you can push a button to eliminate the state right now, would you push it? Tricky, isn't it? If the state could be vanished away, exactly what would happen next? Would things be stable and work themselves out? Would they be shaky or even violent? Would a state form again or not? Well, pushing the button makes the state go away, the effect, but it doesn't eliminate the cause, the myth in people's minds that rulers are legitimate. So it means push the button, no state, but since people still believe the myth, another state will replace it. The root cause is still there. They want leaders, and they'll make sure they have them. Okay, now substitute. Watch how the original question, if you can push a button to eliminate the state, would you push it, changes to, if you can push a button to eliminate the myth, would you push it? Now, without the myth, the state would be impossible. This is why I say the myth needs to be at our front and center. Okay, another assumption. As long as the state exists, we need to change the state for the better. Notice how all the horrid details of the state managed to distract us from the myth. We see infinite problems and we're compelled to attack them one by one. Gee, can't we at least lessen their effects? Let's elect a better guy to office. Let's get the right laws passed. Well, we fell right into the trap. But this is how that substitution technique inoculates us. So instead of saying, we need to change the state for the better, notice how ridiculous it sounds this way. We need to change the myth for the better. See it? A bad idea can't be made good. The state is what it is, a bad effect. So it doesn't need to be attacked per se. The myth does. Here's a major assumption. Look at how big and powerful the state is. It's indestructible. It's an insurmountable job. It's demoralizing. I love this one because it's so false. The myth of authority managed to get us so focused on the state that it's blinded us to the state's weaknesses. Does a lumberjack look at a 200-foot tree and feel demoralized because it's so big? Well, he would if it were just him pushing the tree, sure. But with his chainsaw and his skill, nope. The apparent size means nothing. All he needs is a well-placed cut at the bottom. The tree's natural vulnerability to gravity does the rest. The tree falls of its own weight. Our mistake is we compare our own self as one person to the enormity of the state. Sure, that's accurate math. The state is powerful compared to you alone. But right there is where we stop. Wait, the state is a fraction of society as a whole. They just make a lot of noise and do a lot of damage. But we outnumber them big time. Oh, they're vulnerable, all right. Plus, That monstrous conglomeration of evil rests on what? A myth, and a false one at that. Now that's vulnerable. On top of that, the state itself is actually weak in many ways we tend not to notice. This is a solid white pill, and I'll link to my essay called The State, a Weak Adversary, which fleshes this out more. If you really want that assumption demolished, the assumption the state is a powerful adversary, I suggest you read it. Another assumption, we need detailed plans to dismantle the state. This is yet another offshoot of the general problem of focusing on the state instead of the myth. The state doesn't need to be undone. Not elected away, not reformed, not protested away, no revolution, nothing. As the myth of authority gets ignored, the state gets ignored into irrelevance. That's the house of cards metaphor I've used before. Instead, libertarians have spent untold time and resources trying to undo the state. Well, how about this reality check? You'll never have the time and resources to play the game of the people who want more statism. You spend your life being a productive person, but newsflash, the people in charge of ruining your life, making the state bigger, that's their full-time job. And you're paying them to do it. You're not going to beat them by spending a bit more time fighting them, and maybe getting a minor win once every 5 years. But the elegant answer to this is to strike at their root. Stop worrying about how to dismantle the state. Start thinking about how to dismantle the myth. Otherwise, it's like you're just mowing your weeds. They're gonna grow back. When has mowing your weeds ever eliminated the weeds? Now, I do understand how tempting it is to want to think about specific ways the state can be dismantled. Tempting to want to form a plan. I genuinely think this is a personality trait of ours. We nerds like getting under the hood and making things work. And we justify it by saying, hey, eventually enough people will get it. So will there be a point where we do need plans to dismantle the state? Maybe, but I doubt it. But anyway, friends, it doesn't matter right now. If we ever get to a point where there are enough red-pilled people to where that topic is actually discussed, realize that at best you're talking about step B, and we're not even at step A yet. We don't have enough people over the myth. I'll have more to say about this in an upcoming episode about the transition to a free society. Okay, that's a good segue into the assumptions we make about strategy. If I haven't challenged you yet, then get ready. This may do it. The first strategy assumption. The masses need to be persuaded to libertarianism. Let me show you how the myth leads to this assumption. The myth of authority, of course, legitimizes political rulers. This leads to eternal arguments over which type of leaders should be in charge. And this leads to factions like political movements and parties. And there it is. That indoctrination leads to the thinking that the only way to change things is to get everybody on board with your opinions, that they're all wrong-headed and need to see things differently. We fell right into that one. We took libertarian principles and assumed we need to change everyone into libertarians. You heard me right. Am I saying the masses don't need to be persuaded to libertarianism? Yes. If we're trying to make the majority into libertarians, then we're way off base. First of all, when is it ever successful that the majority of people get persuaded to rally for a political philosophy of any kind? Socialist, communist, Democrat, Republican, you name it. It might seem to people who think politics all the time that the rest of humanity is just as interested. But no, they don't care that much. They might dip their toe at election time. They might get vocal at Thanksgiving dinner or over drinks. They might have a passing interest in some current events. But sorry, most of the time, most people are going about their lives. And as society gets more diverse in their interests and relationships, etc., that trend will continue. People are different, and they have a million different interests and concerns. It's unrealistic to think the majority are going to concur on anything political, including our views. But they don't have to. As I've mentioned before in part 3, in their private lives, people are already compliant with a non-aggression principle. They don't hurt others or take their stuff. Yes, I know crime happens, but when it does, most people view it as wrong. Why do they? Precisely because they're NAP compliant. Well, if they're NAP compliant, there's no need to persuade them. They have all they need. They have an inherent sense of the NAP, even if they don't call it that. In other words, we've been assuming we have to get them all the way from statist thinking to not statist thinking. But in their private lives, the majority of their lives, as you know, they're already there. Now, it's true, they do have a road to travel, but just not that one, not regarding their true self. For their true self, there is no road. They are there already. As to their false, indoctrinated self, yes, that's the part that needs work, the part in the fog. The journey is walking out of the fog. Yes, it's a journey, but not the interplanetary trip, we assume. But then we take the assumption further. We assume they then need to take the time to learn actual libertarian principles. Sorry, wrong. You're presupposing the place they need to land is where most of you are. Well-read, a decent understanding of the economics and philosophy of liberty. No, folks, we don't have to make them libertarian scholars. Just getting over the myth is enough. To be clear, I have no problem with more libertarians, because frankly, the more of them who are well-versed, the more chances we have to see new and better communicators and influencers arise that can spread the messaging outward. Again, I'll have more to say about that later when I flesh it out in my discussion about the transition. Next assumption, a strategy is even needed. This challenges the need for strategy as such. The myth distracts us from reality, making us think we actually need political leaders. This has another effect. It makes us mistrust our nature as humans. And the way the state so infects culture only affirms that mistrust of human nature. From there, from the idea that we can't trust people's nature, we disregard the good aspects of human nature. And from there, we are convinced we have to micromanage our way to a free world. We have to control the path there. It's like trying to micromanage bees to make a hive. Turns out it's better to let nature take its course. The subject of libertarian strategy, to get us to a free society, is very much like that. If you're not aware, it's not a given that strategy to change minds is needed at all. As radical as this may sound to activists, we can't consider ourselves objective if we don't ask ourselves the question, do we even need to spread the libertarian message? Would a free society evolve without it? Or do our efforts help? So far as I could tell, opinions fall into three groups. One, strategists who think our efforts are crucially necessary. No stateless society without it. Number two, strategists who think our efforts help but aren't necessary. A stateless society would evolve without it, but we may be able to hasten it. Number three, those who think our efforts are unnecessary. It'll come on its own and doesn't need our help. My personal view sort of falls between the second two. You see, as I just now mentioned, I don't think it's libertarianism per se that enough people need to be taught. I think it's the myth of authority that enough people need to overcome. They need a fog cleared. But then, to the point here, does even that have to be done at all? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think our efforts are not causally necessary to reach a stateless society, but I can see how they can help things along, although I can't prove they would really make a difference in the long run. So without being certain, I favor the efforts, in case they might help. Now let me be more specific about some points here. Effort to communicate is only part of libertarian work. A separate part, though, is foundational work. The last century, in fact, has seen enormous scholarly work. Economics, legal theory, philosophy, etc. All of this has established really solid grounding for a free society. Work like this continues to this day. All of it I consider part of man's process of intellectual maturing. This is foundational. So if a stateless society is in our future, all that work will have value. That effort is also important during the tough times, the worst of the statist times. It's a body of knowledge and understanding, and the rare few are, you might say, keeping it safe. If society seems to go mad, at least some people are preserving that knowledge for later. Well, that foundational work is distinct from what we might call messaging. The purpose of messaging is basically waking people up. We can describe it different ways, like red-pilling others or making more libertarians, etc. As you probably know, I'd call it helping others over the myth of authority. Whatever the name, it's some form of opening people's eyes. Now, the scholarly work I mentioned can accomplish this too. It can and does red-pill people. But most people, are not scholars. And yet, we want both, scholars and non-scholars, as many as possible, to see the state for what it is. And that's what messaging is about. So yes, I do think the foundational work is needed, but the value of messaging is not as clear. Here's why. The assumption that the future will have lots of libertarians. Here we have the myth of authority causing some binary thinking in our heads. Again, it makes us laser focus on the state. We hate the state and statism. And we're libertarians, right? So doesn't that mean that a future free society will have lots and lots of libertarians? Isn't the flip side of statism, well, libertarianism? Let's think it through. Look ahead, however many years, to where we finally have a stateless world. Question: what percentage of the people would be libertarian in our sense? By our sense, I mean people who understand the principles well enough, have read some books, have a decent grasp on the basics of the free market, the non-aggression principle, and property rights. I think we should be realistic and realize a very small percent will be. It doesn't seem plausible that you'd even have 5% of the people at that level of understanding. And yet, it would be a free society. How could that be? It's because the general population never has to know how things work under the hood. Virtually all of us use TVs and cell phones without a clue how they work. To persist, a free society would have to arise organically and be stable in an organic way. And that includes not expecting 50% of the people to be libertarians. I'm not sure many of us have come to grips with this because I hear 50% type of numbers thrown around so much. Sorry, but no. A free society is not going to be voted in, so to speak. So yes, I would say in a future free society, it won't have even 5% that are familiar with the principles. So, what will characterize the people in a free society? They will be immune from the idea of being ruled politically. To put it into terms I've used, they won't have a false self indoctrinated by statism. They would not even imagine what it means to have a political ruler. Of course, if they examine the history of our present time, sure, maybe they can conceptualize it. They'd know factually that in our time we believed in political rulers as morally legitimate. But they'd see that as they would any ancient superstition, silly and ridiculous. They would no more give way to statist thoughts than they would throw a newborn into a volcano to appease the sun gods. What would distinguish them from our society is this: the absence of the false, indoctrinated self. That's all. So no, they will not be like us with a bookshelf including Hazlitt and Rothbard. Therefore, what are we doing now trying to get more people familiar with the principles? Good question, isn't it? That's exactly how I think this movement's been off the center of the target all these decades. Clearly, its goal was to make more libertarians. And sure, that sounds good, doesn't it? I think they took that great sounding goal and ran with it. No one, so far as I know, spent time really thinking about cause and effect. No one appreciated the myth of authority's role as the cause of the state and how that might point us to the best goals. I should say that I've read passages of Rothbard and Hoppe that made some passing reference to this, but unfortunately they and other scholars never seem to dive much deeper. Okay, so I just made a radical suggestion there that our goal should not be make more libertarians. What the heck, right? So yes, I'm saying making more well-read libertarians is unnecessary and frankly biting off too much. Our goal should be less ambitious. Make more people free of the myth. Keep in mind that as we communicate, there can be two successful types of outcome. One is we manage to get them over the myth and they move on with life. They just understand politics is useless and political leaders are bogus. But for the second type of outcome, they reach that same point, but their interest is sparked. They become like us, a libertarian enthusiast. They want to read, listen to podcasts, etc. They want to spread the word too. My advice is just try for step one. Get them over the myth. As long as they see political rulers as illegitimate, ridiculous, and irrelevant, consider the job done. If they want to study and learn more, they will. Their interest will take them there. Consider that a bonus win. Now, as I've said, getting them past the myth, how we do it, is a topic of its own, and I'll devote an entire episode to actually doing that. Well, I'm pretty sure I challenged you today and gave you a lot to think about. Again, I welcome your feedback and comments, whatever they are. But we'll close this episode for now. Take care, and see you next time. Many thanks to Substack for hosting my podcast and my articles. And thanks especially to you for listening. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.